We'd like to thank you for joining us for another episode of Looking to Jesus. My name is John Hines. I'm the preacher for the North Ridgeville Church of Christ here in North Ridgeville, Ohio, which is right on the northern edge of Ohio, just southwest of Cleveland. I am joined by...
My name is Daniel Sanders, preacher for the Norwalk Church of Christ. We're about 40 minutes west of North Ridgeville, right in the central part of northern Ohio, about 10 miles south of Cedar Point and from Lake Erie.
How are you doing today, Daniel?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm tired. Sorry. I should bring more energy to the table.
That's right.
We had storms last night and we didn't sleep well, and maybe more storms today. We'll see, but it's just kind of gray and dreary out, but I'm doing well. I'll try to put on I'll try to put on a better facade.
You pessimist today.
All right. So we've been talking about different names for God's people. And that's the study we've been doing. We started off by talking about how we are sheep of the Lord's flock, and that is a good thing. As he says, "My sheep follow my voice." And we follow Jesus. Looking unto him, we don't follow a stranger. Last week, we talked about being citizens of the kingdom. And the passage that we started with last week, we're actually going to start with again this week. This is Ephesians chapter 2 at verse 19. "Now therefore you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God." So I thought we might talk about saints today. And for one thing, how does the world think of saints or other religions? When they talk about saints, I'll hear people talk about, like they may have a necklace on and it's, they have some sort of medallion or something, and it's like, well, what is that? And it's, well, that's Saint Christopher, the patron saint of whatever, or that's Saint, I don't know what.
I was thinking of the New Orleans Saints, but that's...
Well,
the football team, I know that there may not be very saint-like activities by them, but nonetheless, you're right. You're right.
Having lived in Louisiana, I can testify about that. And by the way, Louisiana has a very large Catholic population, especially on the southern part of the state.
Well, as you learn a little bit more about this area, there is a large Catholic population up here in the northern Ohio area as well. And you're right with that. There are different symbols. There's different necklaces. There's different statues. There's all these different things that represent, when we think of the word saint, we think about what is being said or what's being offered as that being, like you said, Saint Christopher or Saint Paul or Saint Peter. We start mentioning some of these different things, or even the people that are involved in the Catholic Church today, where some of these people are even called saints as well. Yeah,
I just pulled up, and this is according to USCCB, United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. Satan's, goodness, pardon me for that. Saints are persons, that was not intentional, by the way. Saints are persons in heaven, officially canonized or not, who lived heroically virtuous lives, offered their life for others, or were martyred for the faith, who are worthy of imitation. In official church procedures, there are 3 steps to sainthood. A candidate becomes venerable. This is their titles. Then blessed, and then saint. And sometimes you'll see stories of people who, they've perhaps, according to the Catholic Church, they've done some miracle, they've witnessed some miracle, or something's happened. It's like, oh, are they on the path to sainthood? And they have to go through that. They're venerable and then blessed. And then, I think once they're gone, maybe they officially become a saint, according to the Catholic Church.
A lot of times we look at the word saint is when they're gone at that point.
Yeah. And so that's how the Catholic Church views it. That's probably how some of the Protestant churches also view it, thinking of like Lutheran, Episcopalian, perhaps Methodist, there may be others as well. But is that how the Bible talks about saints? That's really the question, because the verse we just read, you are, for one thing, these people are not dead, as Paul's writing to them. You are no longer strangers and foreigners, in verse 19, but fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God. And so you have this biblical concept of saint that's very different than what most people think of sainthood. So what sort of passages should we think about in understanding what being a saint, what does that mean to be a saint? Is it only for a select few, or seeing how we're talking about the names of God's people, how God's people are referred to? Is it all of God's people? So where you want to go, Daniel?
Well, I got some thoughts there. Thoughts that came to mind for me came from 1 Peter chapter 2, beginning with verse 4, looking down to verse 10, where it says here, coming to him as to a living stone, rejected indeed by men, but chosen by God and precious. You also, as living stones, are being built up a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. Therefore, it is also contained in the Scripture, behold, I lay in Zion a chief cornerstone, elect, precious, and he who believes on him will by no means be put to shame. Therefore, to you who believe he is precious, but to those who are disobedient, the stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone, and a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. They stumble, being disobedient to the word, to which they also were appointed. But you also are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praise of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, who once were not a people, but now are the people of God, who had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. Again, that's 1 Peter 2, 4 through 10 was some of the thoughts that I was thinking about in this lesson, in this discussion on what a saint is. In particular, looking at some of the words that are in this text in 9 and 10, especially talking about some of the roles or some of the qualities that a saint would have.
Yeah, and that word, there in verse 9, a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. The word saint literally means holy.
Yeah.
Or at least it's from the same root word. And so when we think about holiness, would you agree that even in the church, sometimes people have trouble accepting the fact that we can be holy? And I don't know where necessarily that comes from, but this idea of holy, can we be holy?
Yeah. I think there is the ability for us to be holy. Christ gave us an example, and through his life, we know how to be living our life and how to be holy. He's given us instruction on how to be able to seek a holy life. I think another word that we talk about that has some similar characteristics to holy is that word sanctified.
Right. Same root word.
And both of them pointing out some different things of we're to be set apart. Right. We're to be different, not just for the sake of being different, but we are being different in the way that, as we were talking last week about the way God wants us to be. And being citizens, we're doing it in the way we're following God in his word, in his instruction. And so that word, yes, we can be holy. I think as we look in this world, and kind of going off on a little bit of tangent, but in thinking about this as well, when you ask that question, can I be holy? There have been documentaries, film discussions, people trying to think, well, can you follow the Bible? Can you live a holy life? Can you, for instance, live as a saint as described here in the Bible today? And people have tried to come up, well, because of the modernism of things, that we can't do those things. But looking back to Jesus, looking back to God's word, looking back through what we have as inspired word, we can still live, even in a modern world today, we can still live in this world and be holy, be sanctified, be set apart. And there's instruction for us, I think, here. I think you have some other verses as well that kind of talk about that.
And what we're going to do, you're going to stay in 1 Peter, and I'm going to stay in Ephesians. And we're just going to see how they echo one another and how it's like they're talking about the same thing. For one thing, your 1 Peter passage, early in that passage, you also as living stones are being built up a spiritual house. Well, that's the same figure in Ephesians. Having been built, right, and members of the household of God, saints and members of the household of God, having been built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets. We're talking about the same thing. And that house here, as it talks about you are being built together for a dwelling place of God in the Spirit. There's a purpose to the house. Your 1 Peter passage, go ahead and read verse 5 again for us, if you could.
You also, as living stones, are being built up a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ.
So when we talk about sanctified, when we talk about saints, it's you are set apart for a purpose. It's not just holiness for holiness' sake. It's like, no, you are set aside for a purpose. So the Ephesians passage is a dwelling place of God in the Spirit. The Peter passage is to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. There's a purpose to sanctification. And when we think about in the Old Testament, as the Old Testament serves as the shadow, and we think about being holy, and that if you're not holy, well then your offering, as we come to the Lord as a living sacrifice, according to Romans 12, which is our reasonable service. If we are not holy, then our offering is not acceptable. We have to be holy. And so not only can we do it, we have to do it if we're going to be accepted by the Lord. So what does being a saint mean? It's not what the world thinks. It's not for those who have, and that really is a great sadness that they break up their religious groups into, well, you have clergy and laity. But then even beyond clergy and laity, you have the elites, you have the venerable, you have the blessed, and you have the saints, and then you have everybody else. And that's not how it's supposed to be in the church.
Right.
That in the church you have one house built on Jesus Christ the cornerstone. The Ephesians passage talks about the foundation of the apostles. And then we are all living stones, according to our passage in Peter. So we are called to be holy as God is holy. That's what we're called to be. And whether or not people accept that concept or not, that's up to them. All I know is what the Bible says. This is what we're called to. We are called to be saints. In Ephesians, how Ephesians pretty much starts, in Ephesians chapter 1, at verse 1. Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ, by the will of God, to the saints who are in Ephesus. Verse 4, just as he chose us in him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and without blame before him in love, having predestined us to adoption as sons by Jesus Christ to himself, according to his good pleasure. One of the verses that I think really illustrates this call for holiness and this idea that we need to be saints is actually Ephesians chapter 4, verse 1, where he says, I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you to walk worthy of the calling with which you were called. And it's like, that's what we're called to do.
Yeah.
So when people have trouble accepting the idea, oh, well, can we really be holy as God is holy? We can walk worthy of the calling with which we're called. We can be saints. And all you have to do is look up the word saint, and it's all through Ephesians. But yes, it very much is possible. It is what we are called to do. And chapter 5 in the passage that talks about marriage, where it says concerning how our marriages are a reflection of Jesus and his church. And in verse 27, it talks about, verse 26, that he might sanctify. So there's our word again, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word. Verse 27, that he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. And the question is that possible? And the answer is, yeah, it's possible.
The answer is, yeah.
It absolutely is possible.
Jumping a little bit over, but back in Romans chapter 12, verse 1 and 2, he says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy. Now, so again, we talk about that word holy, as we talk about saints as well, being holy, acceptable to God. So there's our direction with everything, right, which he goes on to say is your reasonable service. So right, it can be done to be able to do this. And he goes on to explain how in verse 2, don't be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. So God has given us that direction. He has shown us a way. It's reasonable. It's an expectation that's reasonable on our how. I believe 1 John 5:3 also talks about the commands of God are not burdensome. Because we talk about things in today's world, people will say, well, the Bible was written 2,000 years ago, so it's impossible to be sanctified or holy because of that. Well, no, the scriptures remind us it is possible.
Yeah.
It is possible to do these things, and we're to be able to just put our faith and trust God, looking to Jesus, and being able to establish these things and show and demonstrate those things, and we can do it.
That passage, are you still in the Romans passage?
Yes, I am.
So we come to him as living stones, right?
Yep.
Read it for me again, will you?
Verse 1 and 2 are just...
Yeah.
Okay. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God.
What's the next verse?
Verse 3, for I say, through the grace given to me, to everyone who is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, as God has dwelt to each one a measure of faith.
That verse, and when we talk about holiness, we are not trying to toot our own horn. That's not what we're trying to do. We're not, if we're going to boast in Christ. What we're saying is this is the power of God. This is the power that the Lord has.
Yeah.
And that verse there in Romans also, I mean, it all goes together. This is Ephesians chapter 4 at verse 17. I say therefore and testify in the Lord that you should no longer walk as the rest of the Gentiles walk in the futility of their mind. And it goes on. We may talk more about that here in a second. Verse 20, but you have not so learned Christ, if indeed you have heard him and have been taught by him, as the truth is in Jesus, that you put off concerning your former conduct the old man which grows corrupt according to the deceitful lusts, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind, that you put on the new man which was created according to God in true righteousness and holiness. And that idea of being transformed by the renewing of your mind. Because the question is, okay, how does holiness happen? If we need to be holy, if we have to be holy, as God is holy, how does it happen? And there in Peter, coming to him as a living stone. It's like, for one thing, we got to come to him.
There's activeness with it.
Yeah, we come to him. And, when it talks about how Jesus is both the cornerstone, but he's also the rock of offense, the stone which the builders rejected, they stumbled being disobedient to the word, which they also were appointed. Well, we obey the word. We are called by the word. And in Ephesians 2, it's like, okay, how are we holy? Ephesians 2, verse 1, and you he made alive, who were dead in trespasses and sins. And you once walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air. And verse 4, but God, who is rich in mercy, because of his great love with which he loved us. Verse 5, even when we were dead in trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved, and raised us up together. Verse 8, for by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God. We're the workmanship of God, created for good works. But it's like, how can someone be holy? And it's just hard for us to accept that when we are born again, and our sins are forgiven. And it's like, that's how holiness happens. It's through forgiveness. There's two ways to be holy. You never sin, or your sins are forgiven.
Yeah.
And we know what 1 John says, if we confess our trespasses, he is just to forgive us and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. And we're cleansed, and that's holiness. And when we think about being justified and being holy, that's how it happens.
And going back to 1 Peter 2, looking at verse 9, says, you're a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praise of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Here we go. There's that transformation that you're talking about, being able to have our sins forgiven. Here we are living in sin. The darkness of sin overwhelms us, overpowers us, can take us. But now we can be transformed, being called out of darkness by our choice of seeking and serving God, seeking his light. And verse 10, who once were not a people of God, but now are the people of God, who had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. God is offering those different things for his people, but we see that transformation needing to take place in our life as well.
And as we last week talked about citizens in the kingdom, well, the Jews recognized the kingdom in a certain sense. They were familiar with kingdom concepts, some of them. But you can tell with Peter's epistle, and sometimes because of other passages, here in 1 Peter 2 at verse 10, when his audience who he's speaking to, who once were not a people, he's not talking to Jews. He's talking to Gentiles. And Ephesians is the same way. Now, therefore, you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens. And these people who are outside of the kingdom altogether, now all of a sudden it's like, oh, now we can be citizens of the kingdom, and not just citizens of the kingdom, we can be holy. Mm-hmm. We can be holy as God is holy through Jesus Christ. And so there in 1 Peter 2, for one thing, as you have the contrasts, you have those who rejected Jesus, and then you have those who accept Jesus. And the stone which the builders rejected. And I was just thinking of how I'd have to hunt for the passage where Jesus says, I'm going to take the kingdom away from you and give it to a nation bearing the fruits of it. And you have that. It's another place where the talks about the kingdom. But anyway, but this idea of how does it happen? And when we come to him, and we come as we're called, and he adds us to the church, and the cornerstone's laid, we obey the word, and we become a part of that holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into a marvelous light. That there in Ephesians, we're saved by grace. We're saved by grace. And as things go on, okay, because we do sin. That's the issue. Yeah. Now, one thing we've already spoken about, what should you do when you sin? We've had a conversation recently about blasphemy. And when the Bible talks about blasphemy, and it talks about, is it 1 John? Does 1 John mention blasphemy? Blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. And I don't think that is 1 John. I think that's another passage. But what is blasphemy against the Holy Spirit? It's when you don't believe what's revealed.
Yeah.
And it's when you reject what's been revealed. At that point, and that's where when Jesus says, whoever blasphemes the Son of God, that's one thing. But if you blaspheme the Holy Spirit, that you got a whole nother problem then. And the point that Jesus is making is the works are testifying. The Holy Spirit is testifying. And if you're not going to believe the testimony, nothing's going to convince you. Nothing's going to convince you. If you reject what the Holy Spirit has revealed. That's why, is it 1 John 5, where there is a sin that leads to death?
Yes.
There is a sin that does not lead to death. The sin that does not lead to death, there in 1 John
17 is one of the mentionings of that.
Yeah. All unrighteousness is sin, and there is sin not leading to death. Verse 14, this is the confidence that we have in him, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. Well, what is his will? His will is that all should come to repentance, that none should perish, but that all should come to repentance. And therefore, verse 16, if anyone sees his brother sinning a sin which does not lead to death, he will ask, and he will give him life for those who commit sin not leading to death. There is a sin that leads to death. I do not say that he should pray about that. Namely, if someone's unrepentant, what hope is there? And so we come to him. We come to the Lord. We're saved by grace. And then as we are saved, and we're dealing with the issue, okay, you've sinned, now what? And to just look in Ephesians chapter 5, you have this back and forth in Ephesians 5. You have this negative, you have a negative, and you have a positive. And where sometimes brethren have trouble is when they only want the positive.
Yeah.
And I don't know, Daniel, I don't know about you. Have you ever heard that in your preaching where people are like, oh, you need to be more positive, less negative?
Yeah. I've heard it before. I've had it said to me before about, you're always on the pessimist side of things instead.
I'm never a pessimist.
Okay. All right. We've heard that attested here on the podcast now. Anyway,
I'm holding up my sarcasm sign, at least figuratively.
But yeah, people. Well, you need to be more positive. You need to not be so pessimistic. You need to look at the glass half full, not half empty all the time. Friends, there's a balance of everything. You need a little bit. You need a little bit of both. Yeah, sometimes I may put the negative a little more because we all need help. We all need, we're all looking for that help. We're trying to make ourselves sanctified and holy. We got to see how we can get out of those situations and understand who our enemy is, where it's coming from, to be able to get to understand the remedy and appreciate that remedy of Jesus even more.
Yeah, absolutely. Do me a favor while I'm talking. Look up the verse. I think it's in Timothy where it talks about the vessels. And yeah, I got it. We'll read it here in a second. It's 2 Timothy chapter 2. But anyway, back to Ephesians. For those who, there has to be a balance, like you just said. And there's the negative aspect, there's a positive aspect. So in answering our question, how can we be holy? What does it look like? How do we do that? Okay, we understand we're saved by grace. But what we're really talking about, or what we're thinking about at a certain point, is repentance. So this is Ephesians 5, verse 1. Therefore be imitators of God as dear children. Right? What verse do we keep quoting? Be holy as God is holy. Be imitators of God. Walk in love as Christ also has loved us and given himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet smelling aroma. A lot of people want to stop there and walk in love.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, that's wonderful. And it is wonderful.
It is.
It's okay. We should walk in love. And we love the Lord, and we love the brethren, and we love our enemies, and we should love as the Lord has loved us. That's the positive side. Verse 3 is the negative. But fornication and all uncleanness or covetousness, let it not even be named among you, as is fitting for the saints. Neither filthiness, nor fornication, foolish talking, coarse jesting, they're not fitting, but rather giving of thanks. For this you know, that no fornicator, unclean person, or covetous man who is an idolater has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. Let no one deceive you with empty words. And so there's a positive, there's a negative. You walk in love, and you put these things away. That's what you have to do.
And that's the message as we look very similar by other individuals. You mentioned Paul. Paul did that in several of his letters. I'm often reminded of the one in 1 Corinthians 6 where he starts talking about, those who practice it are not going to inherit the kingdom of God. And then as soon as he gets done saying it, he says, and such were some of you, but you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified. Sanctified.
There it is again. The word again.
Jesus, when he was teaching, I look at the accounts, for instance, with the in Asia Minor in Revelation 2 and chapter 3. He points out some good things with several of those churches. Yeah. He also points out, I
know your works. You tried those who are apostles. You've done all these things.
Here's good things. Here's what you're not doing. I know it's not for all of them. There's Smyrna and Philadelphia that didn't have the negative side of things at that point when he was speaking to them. But those other churches, they were dealing with struggles. He pointed out good and bad to be able to try, look, go back to this, be able to seek this, or turn back to this, turn away from what is unfruitful, turn back to God. Jesus taught us those things, not just there, but in other passages and other teachings as well.
Those churches in Asia Minor, I always like to make the point that even those churches where the Lord doesn't say anything negative, does that mean they never had issues at those churches? I guarantee they had issues, but they had dealt with them.
Yeah.
The other churches,
those
who
are
he calls
present
out,
issues.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they were present issues. They were not dealing with the issues. And that one where it starts with, guess what? It's Ephesus.
Yeah.
And we're sitting here. There's a reason Paul is writing to the Ephesians, and he's saying, put these things away. Do not engage in these activities. Walk in love. The next section, walk in light. Now you are children in the Lord. Now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. For the fruit of the Spirit is in all goodness, righteousness, and truth. It's like, that's wonderful, and it is wonderful to walk in love and to walk in the light. Then you have the negative, verse 11, have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them. It's like, and that's what we're called to do. That's not easy. It's hard. But this is what holiness looks like, set apart for a holy purpose. We are God's chosen people, holy, right? All of our passage there in Peter. The next section, walk in wisdom. Walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil. So we walk in wisdom. Then you have verse 17. Therefore do not be unwise, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Don't be drunk with wine, which is dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit, speaking to one another in psalms, hymns, spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord, giving thanks always for all things. There's a positive and a negative. And the verse that I was thinking of in 2 Timothy chapter 2, where it talks about vessels, but in a great house, and remember...
Verse 20.
Yeah. Sorry, I want to parallel it with the Peter passage. You as living stones are being built up a spiritual house. 2 Timothy 2, but in a great house. There are not only vessels of gold and silver, but also of wood and clay, some for honor, some for dishonor. Therefore, if anyone cleanses himself from the latter, he will be a vessel for honor, sanctified and useful for the master, prepared for every good work. And that's sanctification. That's what it means to be a saint. It's holiness. And that means you have to lay aside the wickedness, according to James, and receive with meekness the implanted word. You can't just receive with meekness the implanted word.
Yeah.
Pardon me while I start ranting now. You can't do that. At some point you run into the parable of the sower, and you're in that third group where, yes, you've received the word, but the cares of the world, the deceitfulness of riches, and the desires for other things choke the word. You can't receive both. You can't serve two masters.
Yeah.
You're going to end up hating one and loving the other, and the world is going to win out. You've got to, if you're going to walk in love, you have to put these things away. If you're going to walk in light, you're going to have to put these things away. If you're going to walk in wisdom, you're going to have to put these things away. You have to be holy. And the Timothy passage is, you cleanse yourself, you repent. You turn from those things, and so now the Lord can use you as an instrument of righteousness, which is a phrase found in Rome. So there's negatives and positives.
Yeah, there's the balance of everything through preaching, through doing the different things. It matters. You got to be able to, got to know the audience. Whenever there needs to be those times, maybe you have to harp on those negative points or harp on the positive points.
Do you harp in preaching?
Never. I know some people are listening to this podcast. There's probably back there choking on a drink right now. Will hear me say that. But no, there are different moments. That's where, our role of being able to present God's word, we got to kind of know when to be able to speak on those different things. There are times where we got to be able to try to build each other up. There's times where we got to break each other down to be able to try to rebuild each other up. It's not trying to.
As
it's
iron
not trying to
sharpens
rub
iron.
Exactly. You're not trying to. As I always use it, the old cliche, you're not trying to just rub someone's nose in like you would do a dog when they made an accident and try to correct them. You're trying to do that to be able to show them this is not what you need to be doing. And you got to try to make correction on this as well. So there are teachable moments with all these different things to be able to help one another, to be able to instruct one another, and to be able to be sanctified as well as what we're talking about here today.
Yeah. And, this idea, I'm in Ephesians. You're started off by camping out more in 1 Peter. Ephesus is one of those odd churches that we know so much about. We know how it started, right? When he comes and he finds a few disciples there, Paul does. So we know how it started.
Well, it's funny.
Then he calls the Ephesian elders, and he tells them trouble's coming.
Yeah.
Trouble's coming from outside, and guess what? Trouble's coming from inside, too.
And it's interesting to see this, and just an interesting point If it serves me right, you're reading from Ephesians.
Right.
I'm reading from Peter, and who's Peter writing to? He's writing to Gentiles, and one of those groups of Gentiles happens to be in Asia.
Yeah.
So we could probably safely say that he's writing to some of these Ephesian people as well with it. So we see the similarities with all
he's hammering on the same points.
Exactly.
He's hammering on the same points, and anytime that happens, you have to back up and say, why is he feeling like he needs to hammer on the same points?
Yeah. If you hear if you hear something, it's like that whole thing. If you hear something once, okay, maybe I'll listen to it. Maybe I won't. If I hear from a different person speaking the same thing, maybe I should listen to this. If I hear from another person, maybe I should hear more evidence or more people saying the same thing. Maybe there is some sort of importance of listening to what they're saying and making some sort of change, as we're talking about, in my life, if necessary, if applicable, if I need to.
Yeah. And I was just, with Ephesus, we know so much about the church. Yeah. And by the time you get to Revelation 2, they've left their first love.
Yeah.
And that's a horrible place to be in. And it's not Ephesus, it's one of the other churches, but it's the one in Sardis that's described as the dead church. And he says, there in Revelation chapter 3, where he says, I know your works, that you have a name, you're alive, he says, but you're dead. Be watchful, strengthen the things which remain, that are ready to die. So there were those in Sardis that were dead, there were those that were ready to die, but then he goes on and he says in verse 4, you have a few names even in Sardis who have not defiled their garments, and they shall walk with me in white, for they are worthy. Exactly where we started in Ephesians, have a walk worthy of the calling. That even, and it's a hard, sometimes brethren find themselves in congregations and they are so frustrated because they look around, walk circumspectly, and they're exposing the unfruitful works of darkness. But there's not a lot of holiness sometimes. And was it possible even in Sardis to be a saint? And the answer is yes. It was possible even in Sardis to be holy.
Even being called dead.
Yeah.
They're still worthy. They're still that walking worthy. Even is still possible.
That thankfully the Lord renders to each one according to their deeds. Yeah. So even if others may not be doing it, even if others may be dead or ready to die, we can strengthen the things that remain, and we ourselves, we can be a saint in the Lord's kingdom. We can be holy as God is holy. By His grace, by how He has furnished us, we can have a walk worthy of the calling. And that's what we're called to. That's what we're called to. Does it take discipline? Yeah. And I tell you what, Daniel, you want to talk about disciples next?
I don't know if we were going members or disciples.
Yeah, that's right. I mentioned members before.
Finish off Ephesians 2 first.
Okay. We'll talk about members next.
Okay.
But after that, we'll talk about disciples.
Sounds good.
Because with discipleship, you have to talk about discipline.
Yeah.
So, but next week, we'll talk about members, I guess.
All right.
So we don't forget one.
Yeah, you made that point.
I know.
I'm here to remind you of everything.
You're here to
call to memory.
You're here to keep me on the straight and narrow.
I don't know about that.
As iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the counsel of his friend. I hear the grinding wheel now. Wait a minute, John. You said we were going to do this. Do you have anything else, Daniel?
I do not. Appreciate your discussion with this today. I think it's very fruitful with everything, and then getting a better understanding of what it means to be saints. It's important. Yeah. We can do it today, even in the postmodern world. Being a saint is possible. It's not how the world may look at it now. We as individuals today can be saints, and God has given instruction on how it's possible.
Yeah. And to the whole point of being a saint, I think speaks to purpose.
Yes.
Set apart for a purpose. And that as we repent, and God forgives, and that we can then serve God's purpose, His saints, in the kingdom, and having our conduct honorable amongst even unbelievers. And that that we are called to be saints. So appreciate you, Daniel. Appreciate the study. I hope it's been beneficial for everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for the kind comments that you've given us personally, and we hope you tune in next week as well as we look to Jesus. Thank you.
Thank you.